Hello, welcome to my new video, and this is day 13 of the Road to Improvement series, and now I'm going to be learning about Carlsbad structure, which I was doing in one of the previous videos, but this is the second one, and I'm continuing the quest in improving overall. So I hope you enjoyed, and let's begin with the learning process. So let's check out the game Korchnoi Karpov from Baguio, 1978. And we had, let's see what we had. We had c4, e6, knight c3, d5. And we have the Queen's Gambit exchanged, as you may see in the introduction, in the description section. Usually this Carlsbad structure appears after the Queen exchange, after the Queen's Gambit exchange variation. And now we have bishop g5, bishop e7. We have e3, black castles. This is all typical, nothing too unusual. Here we had knight f3, rook e8, queen c2, and now c6. Castles, and now knight f8 to defend the pawn on h7. And now white's idea could be to advance b4, b5 to make weakness on the queen side for black. So he can do it by rook ab1 now, but it says here that the next move is used to not waste time for this. And now white takes on f6. Bishop takes, and now because the bishop is not present on e7, now b4 is possible. And the next might come b5. But I think it's not that easy to immediately push the pawn, because white always has to worry about some c5 and such stuff. So it has to be really prepared in detail, like not really superficially. And let's see how this goes. Black went for bishop g4, and now, because bishop f3 might be a small positional threat, you want to go back to d2, and now rook c8. Now I guess that rook c8 is played against b5, because in that case, if you play b5 straight up, then c5 might come, and your whole plan of minority attack by b4, b5 is falling apart, because in this case, because of the pin on the c file, you cannot do much. So I think it's too early for that. And Korchnoi goes for bishop f5 here, exchanging bishops, which is always good when you're playing against the bishop pair. So he takes, and now queen d7. Black offers the trade of queens, but here it says in the book that it's not really good, and that the better move was to play g6 here. And then if queen d3, to go knight e6. And I think again, if you go b5, he has c5. And then there's lots of pressure on the d4 pawn. In the worst case, you will push c4 as black. But I think nothing is wrong with capturing on d4 as well. And also if you capture on c5, well, here black has a pleasant choice between knight c5, which I think even wins, maybe? I'm not sure. Or just rook c5 and putting some pressure on the knight on c3. So after knight e6, it's still too early to push b5, and here they say rook ab1, preparing this, but now a5 is possible, and If white takes, then c5 is excellent. And black has a good counter chances. Black has a good counter chances. Black has good counter chances, period. Okay, so let's go back to the game. So here, queen f5, queen d7. Now white exchanges, knight takes, and now a4, but not like this. Let me just delete this, a4. The point of minority attack is that after b5, you will either weaken the d5 pawn in black's camp, or by capturing on c6, weaken the c6 pawn. But the issue for white here is that he can never push b5 at the moment, I mean, because there's always some c5, and because of the pin on the long diagonal, it's a bit tougher to do that. So you have to prepare this properly, and Korchnoi does it really well, I guess. Now Karpov goes bishop e7, rook fb1, defending, and now knight f6. But also here is one other. Here's a different plan here, and that plan is not connected with b5 and weakening the queenside pawns. It's a5 now, trying to in some way fix these pawns on the queenside to dominate these 4 pawns by his 3 pawns, and to somehow provoke a6 and to make the queenside majority completely useless. So now the knight goes to c5, I guess from a4, because from b4 it cannot go, because b4 is... From d2 it cannot go to b3 because b4 is under attack, so I guess you want to go with the knight from c3 to a4 and then c5. Also, what was mentioned here was a move recommended by Stockfish 92, trying to get to f4 and then d3, which is somewhat peculiar. Let's see what's the point of this. Aha, so you want to prepare the push b5. Okay, that's this one. Rook c7, king g2, a6, h4, h5, knight d3, bishop d6. And the point of the whole maneuver is to stop c5 after potential b5. Stop this. Now you can do more job, additional job for stopping c5 by rook a2, rook a8, rook c2. Now c5 is impossible, practically speaking, and after knight g4, knight b3, putting even more pressure on c5, controlling everything. And now rook e7, rook d2, knight h6, and then b5. With some advantage like 0.6 or whatever. So, yeah, after this, white has a pleasant advantage, I guess, because the c6 pawn is going to be weak, and I don't buy the whole thing that black has any counterplay. There's nothing to be scared of as white, I guess. That's my humble opinion. So let's go back to the game. a5 is also quite decent. Now Karpov goes with a6, which I think makes it easier for white. Because after a6, c5 is basically untouchable. I don't see how are you going to challenge the knight on c5 after a6. It seems a bit awkward. I think it's much better to stay flexible like this and to be able to meet at some point knight c5 by b6 and not to allow such a comfortable game. But he went for this, and knight a4 comes, bishop f8, knight c5. There was one similar game between Rubinstein and Takac in similar structure, but I think the pawn was on c5 instead of b4. The b file was opened and the knight was on a5 and the pawn on a4, something like that. And it was complete domination by Rubinstein. So yeah, just a small note here. Knight c5, and what does Karpov do? Well, he has to defend the pawn, so rook e7, and now king f1. The second part of White's plan, the transfer of his king to the center. Okay, logical. Endgame, so you have to do it. They do it here, transfer the knight. And so far it seems like Black is holding himself together, because there's no breakthrough on the queen side, and the only way to make an advance is through the center, I guess. Oh, just give me a second, I need to do something. Okay, I'm back. So like I said, the only chance for White to make a progress here is to advance through the center. And let's see what's his plan. King d3 is played. Now rook c8. Very logical, very sensible move, because as Black you want to stop e4, and that's why Black is piling up pieces on the e file. And now Korchnoi plays rook e1. Of course, he wants to counter that by putting pressure, preparing e4. And now g6 by Black. Maybe he wants to go bishop h6 to discourage f3, because if you want to prepare e4, you want to push f3, and that's why g6 is played, I guess. Now, what does White do? Well, he goes rook e2, doubles on the e file, and tries to push e4 at some point. But here it's a fun fact that the Stockfish doesn't even see this in the first 5 choices. But I guess it shows that White's position is so comfortable that even this move is, which seems very sensible, it's not in top 5, so it must tell you something that Black's position is not really desirable. So Black goes f6. And here it's mentioned, one defensive idea which Black can use in such positions, a bishop g7, and then to put knight on f5, let's say if h4, knight f5, h5, and then if knight f3, knight f5, to hinder the push e4. Because d4 is becoming a very, very fragile piece, because even if you manage to push e4, Black might just switch to the attack of d4 pawn. So you have to be careful as White when you push this pawn. So Karpov doesn't do that, which I think was a bit surprising, but chose a different plan, f6. And let's see what was his plan. Now Korchnoi goes rook a8, bishop h6, knight db3, and now bishop f8. It seems like he doesn't have a good defensive plan here. Knight d2 goes back, and now h3. So probably he wants to go g4 to stop knight f5 from happening anytime. Now black goes king f7, and now g4. But not f3 immediately, because in that case knight f5 is quite strong and e3 is becoming is screaming, because e4 now is impossible since there's knight g3, and after this bishop g5 and bishop h4 could be quite embarrassing. So yeah, you don't want to do f3 immediately, you just go g4, trying to suppress these pieces, especially the knight from d6. Do not go to f5. Now bishop f8 back. Black simply doesn't have any active counterplay. f3, rook d8. Now black wants to put his rook on the d file, where it might indirectly stop the e4 push. Knight db3, knight b5. Again, putting some pressure on the d4 pawn. And now rook f1. And here it's shown that e4 is not really to be feared of, because after d, fe, rook c7. If white goes e5, then you can take on c5. And then knight captures, of course, you can take on d4. So bc, takes, and double on the d file and have some pressure on the d4 pawn. And I feel like black is doing just fine. So yeah, e4 is too early to play, but h4 was interesting. And if black goes here, for the reason I don't really understand, then e4, takes, bishop g7, rook f1. And what's this supposed to be? Let's check. Oh, the engine says +1, +1.2. Well, now it's +0.9, +0.8. Well. Okay, let's turn off the engine and let's not lag too much. Okay, so white certainly has a slight pull in this position, but it seems like black is very solid, and you need a really good technique and slightly imprecise play by black to be able to convert this. But Korchnoi goes for rook f1 here, and let's see what happens. Bishop h6, and now f4. It seems like white's given up on the idea of pushing e4, but it's still there, because it's not possible to double on the d file since there's knight on c5. Now black goes back to f8, having nothing better to do. Knight d2, knight d6, rook fe1, and now h6. So now white improved his position piece by piece, bit by bit, and at some point he might push e4. Even though it's weakening the d4 pawn, but I think it's the only way to make any progress, really. Also, at this position, the best way to equalize was rook d8. So actually this is not nothing special for white, but still something somewhat better. G5 takes, bishop G7 to cover E5. And after this, lots of exchanges, and then you put pressure on D4. And that's a bummer. Aha, now you want to exchange rooks to make B7 available to the attack. Okay, that's cool. But now bishop F8, and if rook E7, bishop E7 is strong for some reason. So if you take on B7, I take on B4, I suppose. And then everything is fine. Okay, that's cool. But Karpov played H6. Now rook F1, rook B8, rook A1 for some reason. It's move 39, so it's just wasting time move, like just to get to move 40 and then to think a little bit. Rook B8, rook A E1, rook B8, and now E4. Finally, this break. And now black cannot ignore this because there is also E5 as a move happening, or just taking on D5. So black is more or less forced to capture. Takes, knight B5. It's crucial to keep pressure on D4, because if you don't, in that case white has free hands, as I can understand. Now white desperately tries to exchange a very good knight on B5, and now takes, and bishop C5. Oh, not like this. Rook takes, and now bishop C5. And again, it says that there is plenty of ways to make equality. One of them is to go knight D6. And in case of D5, which might seem a bit scary, you can take it, and I guess you cannot capture on D5, because in that case rook D8 can be a bit annoying, and who knows, the king and the knight are under pin, and if you go here, then this can be a bit disturbing, because rook D5 comes next. Knight D4 is also a threat, so bishop C5 as well to weaken the pawns. So you don't want to do that. You just don't want it. Knight E6 by white can be played, but I think... Oh yeah, it says here F5 is the equality. Yeah, the material gets reduced too much, and what's also the issue for white is that B4 is weak. And once you establish the knight on E4, let's say, on the next move, then the bishop attacks on B4, and let's say you get the C-file for the rook. Who knows, you might be the one who is fighting for the advantage. Why not? So Karpov took on C5, and now BC. And this is very typical, like I mentioned before. This happened, this type of structure happened in Rubinstein-Takacs game from 1912 or something like that. And the point of this structure, the benefit of this structure for white is that these two pawns are going to hold these three pawns. But of course, it would be beneficial. It would be more beneficial if the pawn from D4 was on the E file, and then we would have basically this 2 against 3 on the queen side and 4 against 3 on the king side. But it's also quite a good thing, because you have a potentially good B6 outpost for the knight, so you cannot complain too much. But that's why Karpov goes rook D8, trying to cut this immediately, trying to force the exchange of knights, but on his terms. Because if he does it immediately by knight c3, then the structure doesn't change that much. And there might be some pressure on the b file, but I think even that is acceptable for black. I think it was even cleaner to go like this. Knight c3 takes rook d8, rook d7, and just keep waiting for things to happen. Because after this, knight b5, ab. Now white goes f5. Takes. But also the downside of this is that a5 pawn becomes a target, and black might use it after all. I have to go for 5 minutes, so I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. It was emergency. Let me not tell you what was it, but you can imagine. So, where was I? GF, yeah. GF, and now Karpov plays rook g8. We have a very interesting endgame, by the way, if you haven't noticed just yet. And black tries to be active by this move, rook g8, trying to collect some pawns by rook g3, rook a3 even, capture an a5. So actually here, rook a8 was the better try for equalizing, to target a5, and if this happens, just to go king e8 and then try to get to d7. And now it mentions this line, king c3, king d7, king b4, king c7, and now d5. Trying to destabilize these pawns, but if he goes here, now there's this, right? And if you give a check, there is this, and it's a draw. Which is normal, I guess. After d5, then you go here and rook d8, and then I guess you just exchange d pawn for c pawn, and that's it. So he went for rook g8, which was a bit weaker. And now king c3 by Korchnoi. But here rook e6 was more challenging, it says in the book. Rook e6, rook a8. And now the point was this. But now king e7, just not allowing rook d7. And then d5. Rook a5 takes, rook a4. And it's supposed to be a draw, because black has enough counter chances against the h pawn, also the b pawn is there. So that's that. So he chose different move, king c3. But the idea is outstanding. I saw a couple of moves ahead, and I think the idea is tremendous. Now rook e8. Rook e8 by black. Although it says here that rook g5 is much simpler and leads to equality after rook a2, rook g3, king b4, and now rook d3. And if you go a6, just take... first, okay, first ba, king a5, I think it's the same, but doesn't matter. You cannot capture an a6 because of rook a4, so you can push, and it's mentioned that it's equal. It's equal. Okay. Hello, random solver. Welcome to my learning stream. Yeah, this is supposed to be a draw. b4 and king c6, b3, rook a6, rook b4. Yeah. Pretty much a draw. Okay, that's cool. Let's see what happened in the game. King c3, rook e8. Offering the trade. Black is fine by that because it's basically a fortress, so you cannot exchange. It doesn't bring anything, so Korchnoi just avoids this by rook d2, rook e4, and now king b4. So yeah, he might want to go just a5, a6 and just enter, try to exploit the c6 pawn. Now king e8, the king has to support the c6 pawn. And now a6, like we saw in previous lines. A6 here and king a5. King d7 and now king b6. You don't waste time for capturing a6. Now the point is to push d5 and to create c-passed pawn as soon as possible. Now b4 by Karpov and now d5. Okay, now you take it. And now king c8. Now this black's king looks very scary, and I am not really... I'm not really sure about this position for black. I would be very scared to play as black. Yeah, Sean, on rook b4, rook a1 is forced because I want to push b2. And I think in that case we would have some some kind of mutual zugzwang. Not zugzwang, but mutual stalemate, let's say. Nobody can move and nobody can make a progress. Which book is this? This book is Zlotnick's Middle Game Manual. Typical structures and strategic maneuvers. It's a book I read 15 years ago, but like I told plenty of time before, it was not modernized. It was just with some older examples, like from 70s or 80s. But these examples are okay. This is from Buggy on 78, which is also quite old, but you also have in this book some modern examples of typical pawn structures. So what happened? King c8. Now Korchnoi goes here and tries to go rook g3 to put the rook on the 8th rank and try to push the pawn afterwards. And now Karpov goes a5, trying to deflect the king from b6 to make his king less choky. And here it's mentioned that rook c4 was cleaner. Rook c4. Yeah, Zlotnick was Fabi's coach. I think in 2000s. Not anything recently, but I think in the foreword there is yeah, Caruana wrote the foreword. He was his coach in Spain, I guess, and for a few years. And now after c6, rook c3. That's nice to stop the rook. And what now? Rook d1, b3, rook g1, and now king d8. You have to play this because oh, maybe you don't have to. You can play rook d3 as well. Because if you give a check, this is not so dangerous because the pawn's queen at the same time, and there's no issue. There's no issue with that. So it's also possible to go king d8. And if you give a check, to go back to c8. And then you repeat moves. But here, what was interesting was this loses. Because after this, rook g7, king d6, this, rook d1, a5. Now black just wins because he has the support of his pawns, the support of his pawn on b3. And if the king takes, then you take on c6 and you lose all the pawns very soon. f5 becomes a target, b pawn is still alive, so that could turn out quite unfortunate for white. But okay. a5 was played instead of rook c4, and now Korchnoi plays rook g3. And this was actually the decisive moment in the game, and Karpov plays b3, which was a mistake. Of course, his point being that you cannot capture because of rook b4, exchanging rooks, and winning. Easy. But actually here, the best move was rook d4. And if king takes, then to activate the king with king c7, and if king b5 to go rook d7. Which seems a bit scary to have such a passive defense at the moment. It doesn't look so smart to just defend this like that. But actually, there's no good way to proceed. If you take on b4, I go king c6 and then I go rook d5 next. Or rook d4. So actually it doesn't bring much. to white. If you take it, just to check it one more time, king c6, and you can go here, but I think after this you can't hope for much. After, let's say, rook h6, you can go, well, you can go rook d6, I guess, and then just go here. The king is cut off, so the h pawn is not very likely to proceed. Yeah, Sean, see you soon. See you on Twitch this evening. I'm going to be live for sure. Or some other day, of course. So yeah, this was a good way to make a draw. But also to mention here, king a5, king c7 was played, king b5, rook d7, and now king c4. Well, now you can go rook e7, and if rook g6, just b3. And if you take rook e5, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting, because now you want to capture both c5 and f5. Of course, not immediately, but you use the b pawn as a deflection tool just to take c pawn, because it's important to take at least f or c pawn, if not both. But something terrible went wrong. Karpov went for b3. And now king c6 by Korchnoi. So what happens now? King c6, king b8 by Karpov. And here it's mentioned that rook d4 was more tenacious, but you lose the pawn. You go here. And now the point is, after this, you go king d6. And now the c pawn becomes quite dangerous. You don't have time for capturing, because I just go here and push c7, rook a8, and GG's. So black has to go king b7, but in that case just rook a5, step aside, and go c6 next. So it's not promising too much. So now king b8 by Karpov, but you lose the pawn with check. King a7, rook b7, king a6, rook b6, king a7, king b5. Now the a pawn becomes dead meat. And now, oh, sorry, rook f6 first. Rook f4, rook h6, a3, rook a6, king b8, take it, and now white has two passers, which is too much. Way too much. Now rook g3, rook f6, rook g8. Oh yeah, now you go with the good old technique. King c7, rook g7, king c8, rook h7, and then you begin pushing this pawn until it's outrageous, and then because it's c pawn in question, then you can push the rook to h8, push h7, and then just naturally win the game. Because let's just make some random moves. Just make this like this. And now what do you do? Well, Black has to do rook h6 here because you need to defend against rook check and promotion. But now you can just go here, and king cannot go here because of rook a8 and then rook a7. If you go king a7, well, then I push the c-pawn, and good luck with that, with your rook on h6. So yeah, this is the way to go. And this is how the game ended after rook h7. Karpov resigned, and we had the kill. Okay, so let's check the other game. Let's see if this game is... Okay, let's check this one. Pardon me. Okay, so I'm choking a bit, but it's gonna be okay. Food allergies. This game is the Aronian against Anand. Interesting, very modern. A very modern game. So we have c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, and now d5, d4. We have the queen's gambit, but now Anand goes for this very solid Ragozin. Bishop b4. I don't know if this is Ragozin or with queen a4, knight c6. But anyways, it's good. Queen a4, knight c6, bishop g5, h6, takes, e3, castle, bishop e2, a6, and castle, bishop e6, defending the pawn on d5, and now the only thing black has to do here is, from my knowledge, is to just remove the knight from c6 to go to e7, push c6, and then bishop d6, or some stuff like that. But first he goes to d6, which is reasonable, a3, preparing some b4, b5 advance, knight e7, b4, and now c6. So black is doing the thing that usually he has to do, because you need to prevent b5, to delay it as much as possible, because you want to have only one weakness, because if you don't do a6, let's say, then you run risk of having a6, of having a7 and c6 as a weakness. So why not, if you already allow this, why not have only c6 as a weakness and then try to generate some counterattack on the king side? That's the general rule, so you don't have to follow it always, but it's good to know. My voice is super weird today, but yeah, never mind. He goes back to b3, and now black goes g5. Like I said, you have to somehow make a mess on the king side. Queen b2. So yeah, here black has a bishop pair, and he wants to get some initiative on the king side. And now queen g7 by black, trying to get f5 to... I guess he wants to do that, I don't know. Or just to make e4 less desirable, because in this case, when the queen is on f6, to push e4 is quite unpleasant, because there's a potential fork on d6 and f6. So by removing the queen from f6, e4 becomes less appealing. And of course, there's g4 as a threat. If you go e4, I guess you have g4, I don't know. And then d4 hangs. So what does white do? He goes knight a4, trying to get to c5, like in the previous example, trying to get to c5 and to put some pressure on b7 to make black's pieces much more passive. Okay, so knight a4, rook a e8, knight c5, bishop c8. Pretty cool. You don't want to take on c5, I mean, that's just ridiculous. And now g3 by Levon. But it says here that it's a slightly inaccurate move. That the better move was a4. And if let's say f5, to go b5. Takes, f4. Well, this looks really double-edged. Really double-edged. It looks very crazy. And if knight d4, knight d3, fe, knight f5. Oh, this one, knight e3, cb, bishop b7. This one and rook e7. Well, that's crazy. Isn't that crazy position? And then even after this, such a move, it says that it's equal. Well, I'd like to disagree, but what to do? If they say it's equal, it's equal. But I like white here. Anyways, let's just check it out with the stockish. Oh, it's even minus. Okay, it's all zeros. Bishop b8 comes next. Rook a5, bishop c7, rook a c5, and some repetition. Also, you might have g4, g3. Okay. I get it. It's not static, it's dynamic. So you cannot really rely too much on static features like pawn structure. Also, the knight on e5 might look very good, but it also runs danger of being just a static piece on e5. So yeah, I can see where the engine's coming from. It's possible that the position is objectively fine. I can buy that. But Levon plays g3, which is intended to limit the bishop on d6. And what's happening now after g3? Anand plays knight f5, which I think it's way too slow. Here it says f5 is the best. And if king h1, then knight g6 to prepare f4. Knight d3, queen e7, rook e1, queen e4, king g1, and f4. Well, this is promising a lot more than what I think happens in the game. Because with knight f5, black, as I can see from the game, wants to go queen f6, h5, knight h6, but it's losing some precious time, and I think f5 is more direct, and it can put the you can place the knight to g6 to a, I would say, better square. Okay, so after g3, knight f5, and let's see how the game continues. Bishop d3, queen f6 back, rook f1. So you want to anticipate both knight g3 or knight e3 by fe and defending the knight, which is quite subtle. Now black goes h5 and now rook ac1. Black began to make some play on the king side, while white is still a bit shy on the different side. But it doesn't mean anything. Spoilers. Rook a c1. Also, it mentions that rook a d1 was not much better because of this move. Knight h4, and if knight e1, well, then go back to g6 and then prepare h4 that way. Yeah, this looks reasonably good. Queen d2, h4, and have some attack going. Okay. So he went for this, but I'm wondering why now this is not such a good move. I guess it's okay to go knight h4, even here. But he goes for this. Now queen d2. And now knight h6, which was a mistake by Vichy. Vichy Anand. The best move was to capture on g3. And now maybe fg was something that spooked him out. But after this, you can go here, here, and maybe just repeat like knight e3 and... But you can also go rook e3, which is quite unpleasant because the knight is hanging. Also, the queen cannot go to g2 because of bishop c5. So, what to do? You can go here, but step aside, sir, and it's okay. Knight g4, bishop g4, you defend the rook, and you're excellent, I think. Just f4, f5, f4, and black has all the fun in the game, in the position. But yeah, if hg, hg, then we have king g7. King g7, and now e4 is very bad because now we can take it, I guess. Oh no, we can take on d4. We can take on d4, and if this, rook h8. Oh. Ouch. And if you take queen h6. And then the king is gonna scream a lot. It's gonna painfully scream. Wow, this is gonna be not cool. Because if king g2, bishop g4, I don't see how do you... Well, knight f5 might happen, but even that, you can just... On king g2 you can take on e4 and say, what are you doing, buddy? Just... What are you doing? Bishop e4. Okay, it's not so easy, but I guess there is a way to punish this adventure. Maybe queen takes queen h3 check, king f3, queen g4, and then at least just take the piece back. So yeah, this is very bad. I don't have to look at it anymore. After all, it's just a structure training, so if I want to check out the winning sequence, I would just go to calculation training by Agard. Also here, knight g7 was very strong. And then if knight e5, then bishop takes rook e5, and you have the extra pawn, so nobody complains except white. But Anand plays this, and the thing he missed is well, maybe not so easy to spot at the far. He missed this. And if you take on f3, queen takes g5, king h7. Now there's this check. Bishop f5, bishop f5, knight captures, and now this one. But wait, h3, what's up with that? No, there was something wrong with this. Queen f5. Oh. Wait. You take, and e d6, knight d6, and then knight d7, and you follow this up with knight f6, and you win the exchange. But after this, you don't go e d6 because of this, so you lose the whole game. You go rook c3. Rook c3. What a move. And if you take it, then queen f5, king h6, queen f6, and white is just crushing because e d6 comes next, and the d pawn is going to be quite a beast. So yeah, this is after rook c3. What happens if you take on d4 with the idea of this, and oops, I capture your queen. So after this, you just take on h4, king g7, and you take on d4. Bishop c5, queen c5, queen f5, f4. And white is a pawn up, which is good. But after e4, the best move was bishop e7, which was not a... I would not say not... I would say not easy to play. Not very easy to play. But once again, if you run out of moves, bishop e7 might come as a natural one because you defend g5, and if you don't find anything else, you just might run into such a move. So after bishop e7, what was the follow-up? Knight e5. And if d4, bishop e4, rook d8, queen c3, and then knight f5, and black is doing fine. Because he has enough pressure on d4, and he might take on d4 next. Anyways, because the knight is loose on e5 in that case. So that's quite ensuring. After this, Vichy took on c5. And now e5 first. Now the point is, if you take on f3, then there's this, and very soon a checkmate happens. Also, you don't have anything else, because if you take on c5, then whoops, d4 happens, or maybe something else, I don't know. But no, maybe you just lose the knight, because in that case, if you go here and give a check, bishop f5 might come. Bishop f5, and then you're just a piece up with this black. So yeah, white is forced to go e5. And now queen g7, which was the mistake that was crucial. Bishop b4 was the better choice, and if ab, queen g7, knight g5, bishop f5, knight f3 back, fg hg, bishop h3, And white has a slight edge. I agree, because pawns on the queen side are not really useful. White has something on the king side, and f6 square might be a good polygon for activities in black's camp. So yeah, this is still somewhat pleasant, but should be okay, according to the book, at least. So yeah. e5, queen g7, and now bc. And again we have this very, very menacing pressure, because these two pawns hold these three pawns, and you might have something with f4 and so on. So black tries to break the pawns by f6. Levon takes, rook f6, and now knight g5. Unfortunately, you cannot defend g5 pawn, and now the game is over after bishop f5, rook c1. Practically speaking, black is 2 pawns down because of his anomaly on the queen side. And rook ff8, takes, knight f3, takes, rook e4, and after this, hg, and black resigned. And I guess the reason why he resigned is that white has two connect passers on the king side, and what can you do? If you just double on the e-file, white has rook e3, queen e2, and he will eventually exchange rooks. So, knowing that, Vishy just said enough is enough, and I think he did right. He could not save this by any stretch. But of course, even though this is a very nice plan of going b4, knight a4, it doesn't mean that black is completely hopeless, because you saw what could happen in case black played reasonably well, unlike in this case. With hg or just f5, knight g6. Those are plans that black can utilize if he wants to get some counterplay. Just to go back a little bit. So in this position, f5 was the best, like we mentioned, knight g6, and then at some point push f4, trying to open up the king side. Also, in this position, capturing on g3 was the best, and then just going king g7, rook h8, and making some strong threats. Actually, white was the one who went wrong, and at some point he didn't... I don't know which point was that. Maybe g3 was somewhat weakening and allowing black to make a decent counterplay, because with g3 you make a hook, and you allow black to open up with h5, h4. So yeah, this is... I think this is enough for today, and tomorrow I'm going to continue with this, and even make it longer, a longer video on me working on chess. So I hope you enjoy this short, not lecture, but just practice. And I'll see you very soon. Check out my videos. You have a lot of them on my channel, and I hope you learned something. See you. Bye.